Good morning, everybody. This is Matt Kinsman at Connectiv. Thank you for joining us today. I think we're going to have a relatively short but jam-packed Digital Media Council meeting today and also Audience Marketing Council media today. Thank you for both groups for joining us. Before we get started, just a couple logistics. All lines are open right now. You're certainly welcome to join the conversation. We encourage you to do so. We can hear your background noise, so if you need to silence your lines, please hit mute. Do not hit hold. If for some reason I do have to silence all lines, you can open up your line again by hitting *7. With that, I'm going to return it over to our chair, Roberta Muller.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the show today. First day of summer. I hope everybody goes home tonight and whips up a pina colada or some fruity drink or a Samuel Adams Pale Ale, one of my favorites. So let's get started. Today, everything's been GDR, GDRP, and we thought we would take a few minutes today really to look at the California Consumer Privacy Act. I know our Human Resources Department has sent us out a flurry of emails on keeping us up to date on some of the laws and regulations that the wonderful state of California has. So first we're going to cover that, and then we're going to dip into GDPR because I thought it would be a great idea to see, where companies are at, in our space with GDPR. In case anybody's falling behind, this would be a nice way for you to think maybe you might like to speed it up a little bit, or it might give you just a comfort level that you're kind of right in the middle of the pack. We'll look at that. We've got a topic jam and a couple more things coming up. So with that, we're going to start out talking about California Consumer Privacy Act. We're turning that over to Matt.
With California Consumer Privacy Act, I'm just curious what you guys have heard at this point, any preparations that you've made with the Consumer Privacy Act. Is it even on your radar at this point? We're starting to see a lot of localized privacy acts. I think there's one in the works for Colorado as well. So at this point, is the California Consumer Privacy Act, is that on anybody's radar?
Nobody?
Not on ours.
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say this in the chat website. I would say the one area that we have been talking about is really more with the EU, and certain privacy conditions are being circulated with the European Union. So I would say that's the area that we have started responding to, but that's probably in a somewhat different direction.
This is Bethany from North Coast Media. So we did add one small section to our privacy policy pertaining to California residents, essentially opening up the same rights to them that the GDPR allows to EU citizens, essentially kind of assuming that the California Privacy Act is going to become a full-fledged thing. I think it's on the ballot in November, right?
Yes, I think so.
So we kind of have already opened that door for them, but I am not exactly sure how it differs from GDPR in the end as far as the details of the act. Has anybody done a lot of due diligence on that at this point?
Or has anybody just had any conversations, maybe with their legal counsel specifically around California? Has that come up in conversation just when you're talking about GDPR in general?
This is Justin, Roberta, and just from my company here, this hasn't come up at all, to be honest. Everybody's been GDPR crazy, but not much yet on the California Consumer Privacy Act. But I would expect, should everything go through, that this will become a bigger topic, very similar to GDPR.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so stay tuned in case you hear that on the horizon, California Consumer Privacy Act. And we can check back when we start our meetings back up in the fall. We can put this down as an agenda item and see if anybody's been picked it up at all. That's great.
Yeah,
All
while
right,
you were
so-
talking here, Roberta, too, just before you jump off that, I noticed there is a new website that didn't exist the last time I searched for this. It's called caprivacy.org, and they seem to have quite a lot of information about the California Consumer Privacy Act. I've never seen this. Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking at that earlier today as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I assume if any of you guys are working with a legal team, I know we are at North Star, maybe just make it a point to bring that up, and other states that are probably right behind them, like Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's move on over to GDPR. We can flip the slide one. It's the chokehold. I have to tell you, I can't. Everybody in our company, our small little team, every now and then, once or twice a week, is sending around some form of humor over GDPR. And sometimes I do feel like it's got the death grip chokehold over us because it consumes so much of our time. But we're going to start out with Justin kind of giving us a little bit of a overview on what his company's been doing with GDPR. And then what I'd like to do is we had some companies, thank you all of you, who stepped up to the plate and kind of gave us an itemized list of some of the things that they're working on as well and where they're at. So I think this should leave us with hopefully a healthy discussion on where you fall in the spectrum with GDPR, and please, chime in and offer some feedback on your own company. I think the more of us that communicate and, get vocal, the better we'll feel about, where we are in the process, because it's certainly not going away anytime soon. And it seems to be like a lifelong thing now, GDPR. So
Yep.
I'll turn it over to Justin. Go ahead.
Thanks. So can you guys hear me okay? Am I coming through?
Sounds good.
Yep.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. So I'll do my best, to not bore everybody, because I know this is generally a boring topic we're talking about that we've talked about before. But I do think this is relatively important, and I do think that as well, from the application and development side of things, that this is kind of going to be something that every company obviously will deal with and will now just be part of the foundation of everything going forward, and maybe for the best, right? Because it's been many, many years, I think since 1995, since they had the original kind of privacy rules in place on the Internet, which predates basically everything today. So it's really kind of about time that they do this to basically protect everybody, right? So GDPR, in case, just to go back one step on this, right, we're talking about regulation that requires businesses to protect personal data and privacy of all EU citizens, for now EU, right? And I think the California Privacy Act is a nice segue to keep everyone aware that this is going to hit U.S. within the next 12, 24 months. No doubt in my mind that they won't let this linger too long. So I think it's good that the EU member states have taken the first step forward to protect the data of their citizens, protect the data of all these people out there that are now being abused by these companies that have been taking advantage of us and making millions of dollars off of our data, right, for a really long time. So one other thing I think too, before I dive into my slide here, is that within the company here at my company, Strategic Insight, we're a global company. So while some U.S.-based companies, this might not impact everybody that much, for brands like us where we are global, we have brands out in Europe, we have brands in China and in Sydney. So this really comes a long way with us, and in terms of the work that we do. But this doesn't just impact user data. Right? We're talking about not only basic identity information of your users and their addresses and their ID numbers, but we're also talking about their metadata, such as their location, IP addresses, cookie data you collect on users, everything from health, genetic data, biometric data, racial data, political data, right? This kind of goes on and on. It's all the data about your user we're talking about, and that's kind of what this encompasses. So from my end of things at Strategic Insight, right, I'm more on the technology side of our GDPR process, so this hit us quite hard. And in case this is good for the group to hear, I think two systems that this hit us especially hard in is our core CRM systems. Right? So the first one I have on here on the left side, our database cleanup that we did in our core email platform, we use Eloqua. Right? So the task at hand with GDPR coming is that we basically had to go through our entire database of users and identify all of our European users that are missing opt-in criteria, because we don't have this collected for a log of our legacy data where we maybe in the past collected user data without getting their opt-ins on forms. We just collected details. And that's kind of what we have to do now with this is we're basically going through and trying to identify people that are European initially based on domain, right? Because I could tell with EnsemblelQ we have a system smart enough to identify for every single user what their domain is, right? If they're using a European domain or an international domain, or by the country that they've self-identified as they filled out their information. And what we're doing with this data is basically once we've identified everybody who we think is European to the best of our ability, we're basically identifying one, if they're active or not, right? Because anyone who's inactive in our database and is a European user and they have no activity in 12 months or more, we're just going to delete you. Right? You have no interest in continuing work here. You're not active in our database. And really it's more of a risk by keeping that data in our system at all, which is what we want to avoid of getting penalized should we ever get audited down the road for GDPR. But what we did also do is re-engage users that are active, right? Because there are a handful of users in there. We actually identified, in case this number is good for anybody, our global database in our email system is about 500,000 unique email addresses. And we deleted about 20% of that. It was quite high for users that we just didn't have any opt-in information whatsoever, no activity. And all those users that were active, we basically put together communications and alerted these people that if they didn't re-qualify with us, refill out their forms and go through and give us that opt-in to contact you, that they would be basically losing out on anything they were interested in. So that was a process that I think included both our technology and our marketing teams to pull that off. And the second item I have here, yeah, go for it.
So in that respect, was there anything specific or anybody from the business team, working closely on, those rules that, hey, you know what, we're just going to delete X number of people in the database?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Oh, good.
We actually brought that all the way up to our executive level. Yeah. So one thing I think that's missing here that maybe I should have added in because I think it's important, and I think it's actually part of GDPR compliance, is that we actually set a new role within our company, and I think that's something I blatantly missed on this slide, is we have a GDPR officer here now that we've actually added as part of our privacy policy requirements that we are contractually obligated to have someone responsible within our company for GDPR. And they are one of our IT senior security officers has been touted as our GDPR guru and overseer here on all of our application development. And they were heavily involved in making the decisions on whether we were going to delete people completely or keep them in our database or not.
Great. Hey, Justin.
Yeah.
This is Joyce Ness from Watt Global Media. I just had a question, just wanted to clarify, make sure I heard you correctly. You deleted your inactives. That was people. Those were the people who had no activity in 12 months. But then you ran your re-engagement campaign on the actives, but not the inactives.
That's correct. That's the decision that we made here because we had non-active users that were basically sitting in our database that hadn't opened an email from us. Some of them in many, many years, right? More than 12 months. And they shouldn't be in the database anyway. So we took this opportunity to do a cleanup, right? We just, as part of our GDPR initiative, we did a cleanup of those users because it's, that'll clean up our open rates, right, by removing people that never open up our email. So that was sort of the intention with that. And you have the second part right as well. For users that we did indicate that are active and were opening emails from us and clearly are there, right, they're active people, we put communication together, just, clean, email saying basically, as part of our GDPR cleanup effort, we need these people to re-opt in. And we actually did this twice. On the bottom right here on this slide I have basically our timing. So 30 days and 60 days prior to May 25th, we sent communication out to this batch of people we identified that we wanted to re-engage with and just gave them a couple of opportunities to do that. And basically after May 25th, we are not emailing these people anymore just to play it safe.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, is there a problem with the WebEx or whatever it is, the Ready Talk? I tried to join the meeting and I get invalid credentials error.
I'm on it, okay. I didn't have any.
Yeah, Matt, maybe if you want to redistribute to the group the link or something.
Yeah, Mike, I just sent you a message as well.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Yeah. All right, so moving on to the second point on here, because I think this is another topic that I didn't see come up on the rest of these slides, and I think people might have questions, which is Salesforce, right, our core CRM. And our model at Strategic Insight is we have one single instance of Salesforce to manage all of our company's data, European, US, or not. So this was a big area of concern for us because it was a business decision way before my arrival here to have one instance of Salesforce. Some companies have separate instances for different products, but we don't want to have duplicate licenses, so we go with one Salesforce for all, right? So everybody can see data. But as part of GDPR, this is a big problem, right? Because it exposes user data. Collecting it is one thing, but exposing it internally we felt was another issue that we wanted to deal with. So what we decided to do was basically, since we have European-based brands in our Salesforce, we put in new permission sets and new role-based access restrictions to basically build stronger access control rules so that people in Salesforce, especially our salespeople, can't see data unless you're associated with certain brands. And I actually do recommend this in general for GDPR or not, because I think keeping data segregated is a nice way to keep people working in their own silos, even if it's in one system. But as GDPR came along, this is going to be required actually, that we don't want to expose this data to our US brands, right? European data needs to be protected. And Salesforce has really strong access rules, and they are GDPR compliant. So you can follow up. They have a Salesforce has a page available that basically dictates their compliancy rules, and this is one of their recommendations too for European brands, to make sure you have permission sets that keep data separate. And from the technical side, it's not that much work, and so these are easy ones for us to put in place, and put in place rather quickly, as long as we can identify which brands are in the system and which sales reps are tied to those brands, right? Something like that. And the third piece here
did you do anything with individuals' ability to download or export data out of Salesforce?
No, we didn't, because assuming that if we have the access rules set up right, you can still export data from your brand. So as long as those salespeople were working in those locations, in our case, all of our reps are geolocated in that area. So we have a brand called FWW that's in Germany, and they're all in our one Salesforce org. So all the sales reps are located there. So as long as they have the ability to only see their data, they can still export it from Salesforce, but only their data.
Great.
Mm-hmm. And the last one on here. Yes. Yeah, go for it.
I'm curious, has this affected at all, this MedChat Insight, also individual contact lists that you may have in your Outlook system or another system? I know like internally where this is being discussed right now is how, outside of Salesforce, what should you individually be allowed to have, and how do you access it, how do you use it, and so on?
From someone who's outside of Salesforce, like in some other system, you mean?
There's my own private system. So like I have probably like 400 or 500 people in my own personal contact, many of whom may be in Salesforce, but I'll have additional information that I only have access to in my own private Outlook contacts. And so they're asking us to kind of scrub it and justify why you would need that. And I didn't know if that was something that you've heard about.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't had that run inside here where we're trying to justify people opening access for certain things. But as far as I recall with our GDPR officers here, because this, kind of similar topics did come up of who can access things, as long as we had business rules in place, and a lot of it really just comes down to having the right policies documented for me. And should for us here, our conversations have been, if an auditor came asking questions about GDPR, the general feeling is as long as we have things moving in the right direction and as long as we have really good documentation, just like a standard audit of what your policy is, that's generally for me going to suffice. As long as there's a business case to be made of why someone needs that data and what the rules are around their access to it, for me that would probably be okay as long as it's documented.
Okay, thank you very much.
Some kind of like a general, or maybe something you want to add into your privacy policy of who, can see and access your data. Right, so the last piece on here is basically isolation of data, which is along the same lines of Salesforce and CRM, because we have databases, right? And that's something we have to deal with. Because we have brands that are specifically in Canada or specifically in Europe, we made the decision that we are going to start moving these databases physically to those locations. So for anybody working with AWS, in case this topic is interesting to people, you can request through AWS that your databases be geolocated in those areas. And for Canada, this is very, very important that we are basically required by Canadian law to make sure that their data is stored in Canada, and that's something AWS adheres to. So you have to request that of your AWS account manager to make sure things are physically in certain areas, because right, just saying it's in the cloud doesn't really put its purpose. Right? Everything has a data center physically somewhere. So that was an important part of our compliance here to make sure that we had things physically moved to certain locations. And that was something we had to do before May 25th, is we actually, just in case, duplicated databases, moved them to other areas, and then had our developers switch the developer location of where they're pulling the data from the new databases. And there's complexity to that. Obviously, I'm giving you one bullet point here. There's a lot of work around moving databases from here to there. But I think for the purposes of this conversation, that is something we did. Right? We did make an effort to isolate data if we felt like there was any risk to it. And again, I think as long as companies have a roadmap where they plan on doing this and can prove that they are planning on isolating data and moving it, that for me that's going to be compliant enough. But if data is sitting there and it's in the wrong spot, I would recommend people take the right steps to move it where it should be. So I'm just going to breeze through the right side of my screen here because I think some of the other slides are going to say these same exact notes. But I think the other things we did that are really important within Strategic Insight, obviously from the legal side, and Roberta's question before, is we obviously updated our privacy policies throughout all of our sites. And feel free, if you want to check out our privacy policy, if you go to the Strategic Insight corporate site, you could see our GDPR statements that we've added there, which are very vanilla flavored GDPR statements, but our legal team did make some specific updates just for us in terms of where we store data and things like that. And on the audience engagement side, I think the only thing interesting here for the group is obviously we rolled out forms, right? We have consolidated registration forms to make sure that we have the right language on there to ensure that people are opting into newsletters and they know what they're signing up for, and we have the ability to email you, and making sure people know exactly what we're planning on doing with their data, right? No secrets. So any questions on this before we move on to the next slide?
Yeah, I have a question for you. It's Roberta. So going back to the forms, I don't know, do you guys control all forms used throughout the entire company? I know at Northstar, we have brands that might use an event application where they're building their own forms with vendors. So.
Yep. And I imagine for companies that have that example model in place where you have siloed business units using separate tools, that's going to be a problem, right? Because I think up until a situation like now, you've never had this thing, but we're fortunate within my company, right? We specifically chose Eloqua a few years ago because they had the ability to build forms and things within their tool. It's not just an email system. So all of our sites are using Eloqua forms. We have one database for every registration form on every one of our websites. We specifically don't allow people to use one-off systems for those purposes. And especially because once we've had event teams use their own registration systems in the past too, and the end result is they end up moving that data manually into Eloqua anyway to email these people. So if there's a way to migrate those forms into some consolidated tool, I couldn't recommend that more because that definitely would be a challenge with different systems. You'd have a little more work to do.
Right, exactly. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for starting us off. I think that was great, good, healthy discussion. Kind of gives us a check of where you're at. So let's flip over to the next slide.
Hey, Roberta, before we go to the next slide, can I ask one question? It's Tina from Northstar. Justin, on your forms, are you collecting multiple types of opt-ins, or is it just one opt-in?
We have a general GDPR statement now that we've added in that just says basically that you're understanding, the rights of what you're selecting here, like a lot of other kind of sites do. It's very vanilla flavor, just basically stating that we are collecting your data, you understand we're collecting your data, and you're acknowledging that. We only have another separate opt-in for products, meaning you're opting in because we have brands that have newsletters, right, where they're emailing them every day. So we do have a separate checkbox, if you will, for products, right? Like it's not all combined in one. But that's the only situation where we have a separate checkboxes, one for GDPR and one for anything else you're signing up for.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Great. All right. So we're up to Watt Global now, and I'm happy to say that Joyce is with us, and she is the Watt GDPR officer. Congratulations. Hope you got a bonus for that.
Thank you.
So let's see where Watt is at, and then this way it can draw a good comparison for us.
Thanks, Roberta. Thanks, Justin. Those were some great points that you made as well, and I'll be echoing a few of those, but I'll try to get through this quickly. And I also want to acknowledge that Julia Caruso, who is the unofficial assistant GDPR officer, is on the line as well. For us, we started working on our stuff. Well, it was about, it seems like it was a year ago, but I think it was really just about November. And like Justin said, our focus really was a lot on documentation. The whole idea of if you are audited, and knowing full well that companies like ours are not the target of these GDPR regulations. We're pretty small fish in all of this. But we really were banking on to our credibility with our customers. About 12% of our audience is in the European Union. The EEA actually is technically what this applies to, because it's the European Union plus those other couple countries that, like the UK, that aren't technically in the EU. But those companies, and we have a lot of advertisers located in Europe. So we wanted to have our house in order to be able to say, yep, we're compliant to them. So for software, even though this really wasn't strictly GDPR, it was, Chrome security. So our sites are all HTTPS. Oh, I left off an S. And our cookie bar is now live, which I love because it makes me think that I'm, going to get a cookie. So I have a selection of cookies at the cookie bar. It's live on all of our sites. We are using our CDP, Blueconic, to deliver that cookie bar, and we have made the decision that it's going to appear once a day to all site visitors. And we may play with that. For the first couple of months, it might be once a day. It might be, less frequently to those not affected by GDPR as this goes on. Although you see it on everybody's site now, I think everybody's going to be so used to it that it's not really going to matter. They're just going to overlook it. We do control all of our forms. We're in that enviable position. We don't have them all in one database, but we touch them before they go live. Julia, in particular, has the review capacity on those. So all of our forms are being updated to include a statement of, we're calling it the legitimate interest statement. It's not an opt-in. It's saying by doing this, whatever this form is for, you are agreeing that you will be getting mailings for related products and services from us. And we do have, though, a consent box to share the information with sponsors. Nope, I think I have that wrong. I think the consent for it depends on what it is. Like for webinars, you're consenting that this will be shared with sponsors. And for other ones, it is an opt-in. I'll talk a little later about our third-party opt-in that we've had established for a long time, which has really helped us in being prepared for GDPR. Under legal, I don't know if these are really legal. These were things that just sort of fit there, and they didn't fit in the other categories, and I didn't take the time to make up a fourth category. I drew the short straw. I'm the data protection officer. We're using the terminology right from GDPR as opposed to a GDPR officer. And we kicked it around between audience and between IT. We actually have a team of us. Technically speaking, we could say that there are three of us that share the title. Julia, who is in the audience development department, and Andy Smith, who is our director of technology, has been very closely involved in all of this. With Andy and Julia's oversight, we reviewed all of our vendors that are processors, and we documented them for compliance. We documented what they have, what data they have, what they do with it, why we collect it, and whether or not they are compliant. Again, that documentation. We communicated a data assessment procedure to our staff. That is, we're lots of pretty small organization, and a lot of people have the ability to review and initiate, vendor involvement. So everybody is now aware that when they're looking at a contract, they're looking at an agreement with a vendor, it has to come to me to make sure that there is a GDPR compliance statement in it. We've, like all of you, revised our our privacy policy, and I thank you to probably everyone on this call, because I have looked at everyone. I've become a connoisseur of privacy policies, and I've copied from what I think are the best. So thank you if I copied from you. It's live on our sites, and we'll translate it in Spanish. We are launching a Spanish site later this summer. We do a publication for the poultry market that is in Spanish. We're breaking that out of our main website and creating an all-Spanish site for it. Additionally, as Justin pointed out, this affects data all across the company, including HR. And I worked with our HR department, and we put out a notice we have staff in the EU, and current and former staff in the EU, to communicate to them what data we have on them and how long we keep it, and letting them know that. So that was kind of an aha from our side, and saying, oh, HR, that's significant. On the audience engagement side, we did, because of knowing that how important it was to let our clients know that we were compliant, we produced it's a long elevator speech, but we call it the elevator speech. You'd have to be going, pretty much from, to the top of the Willis Tower in Chicago to finish it all. It's about 3 sentences. But we provided that to sales staff so that they could respond to client inquiries about compliance. Additionally, they've been instructed. Again, we've got a small sales staff. We've got about a dozen people. They've been instructed that to copy me on any correspondence related to it, or just let me know if they have verbal conversations, just because we want to know who's asking. We also informed the team about impacts to specific types of campaigns. What does this do for a webinar campaign? What does this do for e-blasts? And to our surprise and delight, when we really sat down and looked and talked it through, we discovered that our impact was pretty minimal, except for the onerous task that we are now facing of the data cleanup, which is why I was asking for some specifics on that, Justin. But currently the impact is pretty minimal, because we have had a third-party opt-in practice for as long as I can remember, and I've been with the company 12 years. So as long as we've been collecting registrations and audience data on subscriber forms and all of our other forms, we've had a box for, permission to send you third-party mailings.
That's phenomenal. You're probably the only one.
That makes, and I'll tell you, that makes Julie and I so happy to hear that, because that's wow, we did that right. Yay. Yeah. So it really does, yes, it cuts down on the number of names available to mail to, but it's always been that way. We try to channel people and say, yeah, we can only mail them to people that have given us permission. So advertise in something that goes to more people. Put a display ad in a newsletter that goes to more people. So those kinds of things. We did do a formal mailing to the records that are identified as EU or with no country, and honestly, I don't know that we've even looked at the results of that mailing yet. It was the first one, and there will be, there's other ways that we're going to be pushing them to consent to things, but I'm not really losing any sleep over the fact that we probably only got a 1 or 2% click on that. We also sent a notification of the changes in our privacy policy to all the other records. Is that something that in our old privacy policy we, and probably all of you do too, there's a statement in there saying you'll be notified of any changes in this privacy policy. So we went ahead and did that. We also did something I thought was sort of interesting. I called it content marketing. We ran a story on our sites. We have 2 content sites for our 2 markets, for pet food and agribusiness. We ran a story about our GDPR compliance, and the idea was to promote that in our newsletters. I've since learned that it really only ran in the pet newsletters, not in the ag newsletters. And I think our ag market actually has more European involvement, but I'll deal with that later. But we ran that story to see if people would click through, and then the idea was if they clicked through and they were a visitor coming from the EU, they would get a special pop-up about compliance. We had a pretty low click-through rate, so I still think it was a good idea. And we're going to do a little more to promote it in the future and see if we can get some that way. But at the moment, still, if they do a search on GDPR on either of our sites, they'll find that article.
Great.
And
so did you do any kind of formal training for people in the company or for salespeople in general? Okay, good to know.
No, we didn't. Like I said, we communicated with our sales staff. We had the little bit of communications with HR about their stuff, and the communications of the sales staff is ongoing, particularly as Justin pointed out for the CRM kinds of issues, the limitations they will now have on just adding people. I found this list of all these people from company XYZ. These are all prospects. Let's put them on our newsletter list. Now I can't do that anymore. So those communications are ongoing.
Great. Thank you. Anybody have any questions out there about anything that we just talked about or where they're at? All right. Great. Thank you for sharing, Joyce. And Julia, thank you for all your work. All right, let's switch over now. We've got EnsemblelQ, so Rhonda Hughes, I believe, can't join us today, put together some bullets for us. But do we have, by any chance, Daryl on the phone?
Hi, everyone. I'm here.
Hi, great. So we have Daryl here, and he did a lot of the work for EnsemblelQ around GDPR. So let's see where EnsemblelQ stacks up. And again, anybody's got any questions along the way, feel free to pop in. Go ahead, Daryl.
Thanks, Roberta. So just pinch hitting for Rhonda this morning because she's traveling. So I'm going to actually start at the bottom right under audience engagement because everything else everyone's kind of touched on. But EnsemblelQ, the first thing we did when we started working on this probably back in November of last year is we looked at how many records we actually had in the EU because we knew that it probably wasn't a lot in the grand scheme of things. And when we checked it out, I think we came up with like 20,000 or less, to be honest with you. So all in all, we got pretty lucky, I'd say, because it's something that didn't really affect us just because of the, our audience and where they were located, and it's just generally not where we do business. So the first thing we did, like I said, we checked those records, and we identified records that didn't have any country. And we set up an email to send out to them, and I think we sent them two different emails, just basically trying to get them to update their records before May 25th. And basically, if they did not update their records, we just made the decision to purge them. As far as the any of the EU records, we consider that low-hanging fruit in the grand scheme of things. So we made the decision to purge them and just get away, do away with them. And we also worked with our data processor to come up with a nightly script. So whenever an EU record is identified, it purges them every night. So from an audience engagement standpoint, I would say that we may have, a handful of EU records for maybe about 12 hours in our database before it gets scrubbed every day. Moving on to the software engineering side of things, even though we realized that, we have a lot of EU records, we wanted to protect ourselves and cover ourselves wherever we can. So on our website, we added a cookie/privacy bar on all our U.S. and Canadian websites. The cookie bar, basically what it does is, if you hit OK, it accepts your consent for about 365 days. So that cookie bar essentially goes away, and maybe a smaller tab might appear on the bottom left-hand corner of your browser, but it pretty much hides itself, and then after about a year, it will pop up and ask for your consent again. We also felt that it was important to, really, educate people who were coming to our website what a cookie was. So we created a special landing page that explains what cookies are and how we use them. As far as the legal side is concerned, registration forms. So we do use third-party vendors for our registration forms. So we just made sure that all of our registration forms have, the proper consent verbiage and a checkbox to say, hey, I consent to, your privacy policy, et cetera, et cetera. Any lead generation forms, we actually have, a question in there that asks, for example, are you in the U.S.? Yes or no? And then it has the proper consent verbiage. As far as legal is concerned, we actually had legal counsel in Canada and in the U.S. For both English and French translations, and we updated our privacy policies to include all the GDPR stuff in both languages. For our Canadian division, I worked a lot with them just to make sure that their subscription forms were up to date, that they had the proper consent verbiage, and those GDPR, cookie privacy bars were on all of the websites. But overall, I think we kind of got lucky just because of, the number of records that we actually had and the type of business, that we do. It's mostly in North America.
Great. So did you guys select a GDPR officer?
Yeah, you're talking to him. I drew the short straw on that.
Woo-hoo. It's so sad, the short straw. I have another question for you. So when it comes to forms, I believe you're supposed to not only just put the the opt-in, the check boxes on the form, but you have to create a history of what was on that form at that time in case you change that form later on. Did you guys do anything or discuss anything about that?
To be honest with you, we haven't. It's an interesting question because one of the things that I had learned or thought, that we probably had to do along the way is, create logs or just have a record of the history, like you were kind of alluding to.
Right.
We haven't really done that, and it's something that, in fact, I just got an email from, our software engineering team that, Spugo, which is our third-party processor for registration forms, has sent some updates to their GDPR compliance and what they're doing. So I have a call with them later this afternoon to get an update on that. So perhaps that will shed some light on maybe, history or, a log of what what previous versions of the forms look like. But we haven't done anything yet, though it's something that I certainly have thought about.
Great. All right. Does anybody have any questions on any of those items that we just talked about? Okay, so hopefully a lot of you are feeling comfortable that you're kind of right in the same lane with everybody else. Thank you so much, Daryl. Thanks for sharing today. Let's flip over to see who's next. All right, so next up we have Brief Media. So we have Natalie Williams, and I believe we also have Kyle Smith. joining us?
Hi, Roberta. Yes, I've got Kyle Smith, who is also our DPO for GDPR. And I won't go through all of this line by line, and we'll just try to add a couple of things that others have not touched on. The first one being, if someone has not yet started, the Telium put out a PDF that's available for download that's called a data governance checklist. That was by far the most comprehensive list that we found in preparing for GDPR, and then we took that. It has both kind of business considerations and technology considerations, and then from that, Kyle worked through that to build out our kind of our process and our items that we were doing to get ready for GDPR. And then I think, well, I won't say Kyle was panicked, but until about maybe early April, we knew that we needed to collect consent, but we didn't have, we were thinking that we were going to have to build consent tools, and that's where we lucked out with some of our vendors providing those solutions for us. So BlueConic offers the tool for collecting consent, and Omida also has that tool available, so that saved us from having to build those out in-house and was helpful. And then really we're at the point now, we were as ready to go as we wanted to be by May 25th, but just the now what's questions, I think we've heard on this call, we do have the issue of still some rogue forms. I know our sales team still builds some things in Wufoo, and we've just had to educate and make sure that we don't have kind of any rogue forms that aren't collecting proper consent floating around, or anything stored outside of what we have protected. And then also kind of something else that's come up just this week is, we're collecting some consents or opt-in, opt-outs online, but then making sure that that goes back into anything that we collect there syncs with our email system so that we can query that. So we're kind of working through building that out. And then I've heard a couple of things on this call that we'll need to look into. We use AWS for our servers. I don't know if we need to look at geolocated servers. And then also, I think, Roberta, it was you that just brought up keeping history of the forms and what was asked at what time is not something that we have right now. So I think now we're just in the refining and making sure that we're continuing to stay on top of things as they come up.
Great. Perfect. Yeah, we also do training. So at North Star, we have those training modules when you're a new employee, and then throughout the year that our network operations team makes us watch and respond to. I'm usually the one that gets the notices that, you're behind schedule. So those have been really helpful, too, I think, just to kind of educate people along the way on GDPR. So great. Any other questions for Brief Media?
This is Tina from North Star. I have a quick question. Under your audience engagement, the third item, you built a path for users to request data deletion. I was just wondering if you could talk about that process.
Sure. This is Kyle Smith. So what we did was on our registration forms, there's two client-facing sides to that. There's the registration form, and then once you create your profile and log into the website, you have your profile page. On that profile page, you have the option to request a download of all the data that we've collected on your account across all systems, if available, and we can package and send that to the user themselves. We also have a way for a user to request that their profile is deleted and that we no longer store information on them, which after we sent out some of our privacy policy notifications actually got used right off the bat. So we had some EU members request that their profiles be scrubbed and that their accounts be shut down, which we were happy to do. And in that process, we went through and we checked all systems against their identifiers, removed it, and then sent notification back to them that we did so within 72 hours. We also had people in the U.S. request the same thing. Even though we're under no obligation to do that, we went ahead and did it anyway, just to be good stewards of data protection. So there's also a way in your contact form you can request profile deletion and request profile download, and then we also included it in our privacy policy. And in order to do that, we set up a new contact method called privacy@briefmedia.com, so those requests go directly to that email address, which has some team members on it that facilitate those requests in a timely manner.
So how many systems is your data across that you would have to go in and delete?
So we did some work early last year or late last year and beginning of this year to unify all of our tracking systems and our data systems. So if you look under software engineering, point number 4, we built a network where all of those were siloed into different components, and now they're streamlined into one unified system. So at the center of that is BlueConic, which we built custom feeds to and from all of our systems. We're sitting somewhere around, I think, 5 systems that handle different types of tracking as well as email deployment and things like that. So when we get a request from a user, what we do is we scrub from the BlueConic side, which then trickles into other systems. As Natalie mentioned earlier, the process for deleting someone from our email deployment system is manual at this time, but we're working to build an automated system for that.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
When you respond back to your end users that the data you're providing them back a copy of their data,
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
We don't provide a copy of the data at that time. We will if they request it. But if they're just asking for their profile to be deleted, there's technically no language in the GDPR regulation that says we have to respond in a certain way or we have to provide X and Y upon request for deletion. All it says is you have to respond in a timely manner, which is, I believe, they dictate is 72 hours. They don't say if that's business or not, but we try to jump on it immediately. And in that case, when we email them back, we let them know that their profiles have been removed. They've been removed from X systems, and they're free to contact us with any more questions if they have them.
Great. If you do have to provide back data, if they request it, is that data encrypted in some way?
So it's not. It's encrypted in the systems, but once you export the data, it's no longer encrypted. There wouldn't be very much proof in the pudding as it is to send encrypted data to a user.
Right,
they wouldn't know what they're seeing, and
right.
that could also cause problems later on.
Yeah, okay.
So this is Tina again, just quickly. What we're doing is we're using Mimecast to email, because emailing, the transition itself is encrypted. Not the data when you open it, but yeah, just an FYI.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. That's what I was thinking about. Great. Okay, good. And I have another question for you. So have any of your clients started reaching out to you specifically where, we don't want to renew until we know what your GDPR, do you have any clients that are really kind of pressing you for information and updates on GDPR at all?
Yes, we actually have. We've had a couple of clients ask us quite quickly after the May 25th timeline, so glad we were prepared to send over documentation on the steps that we took to become compliant, as well as our process for obtaining and ensuring data protection, and we sent them our privacy policy and also our terms of service that explicitly spells that out, and they were satisfied with those answers.
Okay. And so do all those types of requests, because they could be coming to anybody, right? That could go to a salesperson. It can go to anybody. Are all of those correspondence going back to the end user through you as the person who drew the short straw for a GDPR officer?
Yes. So the requests actually get funneled to a email address, privacy@briefmedia.com.
Right.
Has 3 members on it. Myself as the data protection officer, Natalie Williams, our COO, and our senior audience manager. And from there, we take action on that, primarily myself. And then if there's any other help that's needed, then I'll loop in our senior audience manager, and then I respond back personally from my personal email that it's been taken care of, and then they have an open line of communication with me if they have any other questions.
Great. Perfect. All right. Thanks so much. We've probably got 2 more to go, and hopefully you guys are feeling that this is helpful. So next up we have North Coast Media. We've got Bethany Chambers on the line. And, if you want to kind of look at your bullet points and highlight anything specific as a standout that maybe we haven't addressed so far, and also tell us if you've got a GDPR officer as well or data steward.
Okay, yeah, so just quick highlights because pretty much everybody has covered the same sort of things that we've done. We have very small contacts in Europe, so for us it was pretty insignificant, I guess, when you look at our overall database. So we did not assign an official DPO. However, what we call an internal privacy officer. We did the same thing that a lot of you did, where we have the privacy@northcoastmedia.net as our specialized account for tracking and keeping all of the contacts and information regarding privacy requests. I think only kind of a couple little things that stand out as things that we did that maybe I haven't heard about here today. One is that in addition to converting our sites to HTTPS, we are Dockerizing our sites. That process has been long and arduous, and we're now well past our original anticipated deadline for the launch of those things, although we're supposed to launch on Friday, so I'm crossing my fingers that that's actually going to happen.
Can you explain a little bit about what that means in case there's anybody on the phone who might not be familiar with that?
Yeah, so we're moving to utilizing Docker as our development environment and as part of our host environment. So we have AWS, and we've been with them we had moved to them last year this time. And with Docker, because it's an image-based repository, so it's a more secure environment for your sites. So that's one of the things that, given the growth of our websites and our brands, we thought this was a really good time to do that, since we were going to make the conversion to HTTPS at the same time, kind of made it an overall website security project at one time. So the challenge has been that Docker is a somewhat newer technology, and we had to find the right vendor firm to do the conversion for us for our sites. And then we had some compliance issues between AWS and Docker, and then between the firewall service we use, which is called Atomic. So we've had to work out, make sure all the systems play nice with each other. So that's really what the holdup's been, and that's one of the things that we're hoping to have done here soon, like I said. But we only really have, out of all of we have like 22 some websites, 6 primary websites. Only really one of those does significant traffic in the EU or in Europe at all. So that for us hasn't been as huge of an issue, but again, just security in general is really important for our sites. So, and then one other thing was just that during our annual sales meeting and then our annual content meetings, we did an educational session on GDPR for all our staff, and we created an internal reporting structure. And again, I think we are, like everybody has already mentioned, we did the database cleanup, and we had access controls on all our databases, but this was really just that next step of making sure that your sales team's not cold calling or not doing anything that might be a hindrance to all of the other processes and things that you put into place for your GDPR compliance.
Now, for you, do you have any like next steps? Like, is there anything else like, and next month we're going to be working on this, or we're going to focus later on this? Anything downstream that you guys are thinking about?
Yeah, I think a big part of it really is looking at finding a way to take what we've done on the privacy policy side. So we sent all the required notices and things, but we know that our audiences are more and more interested in privacy information. So coming up with a campaign, really a marketing campaign that talks about the work that we've done here to protect your data and to allow people to have access to it. And I've definitely heard some things here today that we will probably be talking about in our next data committee meetings, namely in particular that security compliance protocol I think is a great idea, and then also how we're keeping the logs of our history on our forms, since we do have something like 19 different tools that are used across our brands. Again, kind of similar to what you've faced, Roberta, having a lot of different legacy tools and things that we've kind of pieced together. So we have to find a way to make sure that we can keep logs and all the changes on all of those.
Right. Great. All right. Any questions? Any questions? Anybody else doing anything like Dockerizing their sites at all? All right. Okay, great. We're almost done. We've got going to give an update from North Star. We've got Tina Logan on the phone, who's been knee deep in the GDPR chokehold. So go ahead, Tina. Yeah.
So North Star has an internal GDPR committee, and it includes, from HR representation to business to technology, and the digital media team. And then we also have an external legal counsel that is officially acting as our DPO. So we've worked with the legal team hand in hand on every decision we're making right now. So I think the things maybe we didn't talk too much about yet, we're currently we had a data protection addendum created to send to all of our vendors who are processing PII data on our behalf, so our email system and our audience database, that kind of thing. So we're in the process of getting that out the door. And then probably the other big thing that we're working on, we just finalized our incident response plan, and we are working towards coming up with a process to actually execute the data subject requests. We have close to 40 systems, so we have to figure out how we're going to actually erase data in all of those systems. That's kind of where we are, and that's probably our biggest challenge right now. I think everything else we've already touched base on.
Yeah, and we also had a couple clients that contacted salespeople which Tina has worked with, who were asking for GDPR compliance letters and stuff like that. And did we have our lawyer look at those specifically, just to get it started?
Yeah, in some instances, they're actually addendums to contracts. In other instances, we're just kind of trying to work with the sales team. We have agencies asking us to sign a very blanket, very generic statement about GDPR. And legal has advised us, we probably don't want to start signing these very random forms that really don't have they don't protect North Star at all. So we get a little bit of both. Yep.
Right. And so what do you see as your next items to work through with GDPR, so we can give people a heads up of where we're going next? I know there's a laundry list.
Yeah, I think the big one right now is that how do we actually execute somebody coming to us saying, please erase my data? Or I think we know how we're going to deliver, the portability request, for their data, but actually gathering all that information we're still working on. Because it's just spread out against too many systems.
Right.
So that's a big one, right? And then, we still have to work through our data retention policies and how we're going to manage deleting data automatically. Yeah.
Right.
And then internally, just continuing to educate internally.
Great. All right. Does anybody have any questions for Tina or any of the other speakers that kind of gave us an update? All right, good. Thank you. Well, yeah, so hopefully that was helpful and kind of gives you an idea of where most companies are at, since we all, with what we looked at today, we were all kind of in a similar place. And so the individuals' names are on the slide. If you ever want to reach back out to them and ask them anything specific, I'm sure they'd be happy to share some information offline with you. All righty. So that was GDPR. I think next up we have a topic jam, which I'm probably going to ask Justin also to take a look at that for us. But we had been speaking with Crystal Kopez from RevMade, and she's such a great, terrific asset to kind of work with. And we were having conversations along, user experience. And you look at a lot of consumer sites or B2C sites out there that they're beginning to look a lot more streamlined and kind of scaled back a little bit. So I think it's we were talking about specifically, do traditional B2B companies need to start following that route, and where are people at with their user design? So these are some bullet items that she put together to speak to, but she wasn't able to join us today. So I don't know if Justin's still on the phone. If maybe I know he does a lot of user experience work in his own organization. But maybe we can kind of talk a little bit about these, kind of high level.
Yeah, I'll be happy to, Roberta.
Great.
So I think Crystal's notes here are really good. Obviously, on the topic of UX, it's a really important part of the process for building any software application. And obviously, I think everyone here knows what UX is. But I do like that they have a couple of items here that are noted that are specifically for like media companies, right? When they're doing this kind of process, where for me the key piece where this comes into play is when you're trying to save developers time, right? Because we have really nice UX processes where I think Crystal has some notes here, which is basically, kind of dictating that obviously these play critical roles in project and it means low friction on tech. But the way that we specifically utilize UX is that we build like grids of our websites before we actually start building the designs of these things. So meaning in the first few iterations of our development cycle, we go through UX phases where we basically just build blank grid websites with no real content on them, just for the purposes of creating layouts and making sure columns are in the right order and positions of things, especially when it comes to usability of responsive design. But I think these are all really good, important aspects of UX, really, to just make sure that you have a step in your process for building software in between where designers are designing mock-ups and developers are building.
Right. Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. We've gone through a lot of redesigns with all of our websites, and as I look at them more and more, they still are somewhat traditional in the sense of the way they look. We have started using a lot more imagery, which I think is great, and we've started using a company like Shorthand, which allows the editorial team to create very immersive type of really great looking articles per se. But
I love Shorthand, Roberta. I think that's a great tool. Yeah, I recently found that in the last few months, and I think it's great. Our editors are using that as well.
Yeah, and it's right out of the box, can be used by the editorial team, which is good. You can move things around, and you have a lot of themes and templates. Is anybody else on the phone kind of recently, have you gone through a website redesign, maybe last year or earlier this year? And if you did, did you do anything specific with the UX during that project? Nobody? Justin, do you ever outsource the design portion of any of your sites? And is there any specific design companies that you've worked with that you found have been better than others at really understanding UX?
Yes, we do outsource designs now and then on projects. We have an internal design team, but there have been specific initiatives where there's been a budget to go external for one reason or another. And I think that'd be a great topic for us actually for a future presentation. I think we can go all day with this one. I hate to bore people, but Yeah, I think off the top of my head, there's an agency that I've used recently in the past. They used to be called Big Spaceship. They were in Brooklyn, but I think they've changed their name in the last few years, and now they are called, the name's escaping me. I'm sorry. I think I can dig it up for you, Roberta. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And has anybody on the phone been doing anything specific with advertising? Because it is rather disruptive. You know, I know there's been some changes too in the way your people like flyover ads or push down ads and stuff need to be changed. Anybody on the phone doing anything specific or having conversations as it relates primarily to ad units on your websites and having to change the format of those sites or spell something differently? All right. Well, we can definitely have this as another topic at a later date. These are some good points, and feel free at any time, maybe if you want to reach out to Crystal Kopaz. She's got her own business, and she's just a delight to work with. So, all righty. I think that brings us almost to the end of our show here today. Any other questions before I turn it back over to Matt? We'll do a little bit of, what's going around at Connectiv and our little summer hiatus. All right, Matt, back to you.
All right, thanks, Roberta. Well, guys, I thought this was a terrific discussion today, and I appreciate everyone's efforts who submitted today and gave us a little peek behind the curtain about what you guys are doing with GDPR, and we'll be distributing the slides to all our attendees today. Just in terms of Connectiv, as Roberta said, we'll be going on a summer hiatus for the committee, but we'll be resuming in September, and I would certainly welcome you guys to submit any suggestions for additional topics, and if you have any other questions that you'd like the committee to address, certainly submit those as well. We don't have to take the summer off of actually addressing some pain points, getting some messages or questions out to the committee to get you guys some feedback. In terms of what Connectiv is going to be doing, next week we have a conference for our sister association that we merged with last year, Association Media and Publishing. That's in Washington, D.C. I know some of the service providers on the call are going to be on that show as well, but heavy focus on digital content, a lot of overlap with what we're talking about with the association media space. So it's we're looking forward to a good show. Attendance is up. Exhibit hall is sold out. So we think there's going to be some good overlap with what we have to talk about, and some of that could be fodder for future discussions for our committees. In terms of webinars, keep an eye out. We're going to have webinars coming up featuring our 2018 Grand Neal Award winner, Architect Magazine from Hanley Wood. They're actually going to be talking about their user experience, different technologies that they're leveraging, and also different experiences that they're creating across different platforms. We're going to have webinars on managing the tech stack, and also on lead scoring, so certainly keep an eye out for those, and anyone within your organization is welcome to attend those. And finally, we are starting programming for the Business Information and Media Summit, which is going to take place November 12th to November 14th in Fort Lauderdale. We're just starting the programming now, so I certainly welcome your suggestions, anything that you'd like to see. If you have a good story, please let us know. We'd love to get you on the program as well. Personally, I'm handling the strategy, the advertising and marketing services tracks, and then also a new track that we're introducing this year on technology and user experience, which seems to be pretty timely. So, again, I certainly welcome your input on that, and always looking to have fresh faces and new voices on the program, so I'd love to get you guys involved as well. Any questions on that?
No, it's great. All right.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy your summer, and keep in touch via email. All right. Thanks, Matt. Thanks so much. Thanks, Justin, and all of our presenters.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good summer.
Thanks so much. Thanks.
Thank you.